First, on strike activity, and as you've seen in press coverage and probably know from other information sources, we've seen something of an increase in the frequency occurrence of strikes. There were two substantial strikes covered heavily in the press at John Deere and at Kellogg during the last several months. But when you look at wider data, you also see that there are indications of increased strike action. ILR actually started a new research project tracking all kinds of strikes, large and small. The government typically only tracks large strikes. Our research is called the ILR Labor Action Tracker. So if you want to learn more about where strikes are occurring and their frequency, you can look at that. It's on public access on the web. And what their data show is that over the last year, there has been somewhat of an increase in strike occurrence, larger than what had more frequent strikes and somewhat more workers involved than what had occurred for a few years before that. But at the same time, what that data shows is compared to historical occurrence of strikes in the 1970s or even the 80s and early 90s, the number of strikes is trending down. Some of that's because there's lower levels of unionization in the private sector, but also even where unions are controlling for the presence of unions, even the recent uptick pales in comparison to the frequency and the number of workers that had been involved in strikes in the past in the United States. So yes, there's something happening, but it's not the kind of large scale, massive events that sometimes the people in the press claim. What I want to do is mention a couple things that come with both a historical and a research perspective looking at strikes, and that is that it's not unusual. It's by no means unusual for the frequency of strikes to increase when the economy is doing well. We call this the pro-cyclical nature of strike occurrence. For 150 years, workers more frequently go on strike when the labor market is tight. So it's no surprise as the labor market has tightened, rather severely tightened, the unemployment rate has dropped, opportunities have increased for employees. Employees are increasing their strike frequency. Again, increasing their frequency somewhat, but not the kind of gargantuan increase that you sometimes sense that the press is claiming. The other question you can ask about strikes is, why are we having strikes now? Why, when conditions are better, do we have strikes? And here I turn to kind of the theory of strikes that I and many analysts of strikes use, and that is what history shows is strikes commonly occur as a result of a miscalculation. One or other side involved in the negotiation or demands at the workplace are overly optimistic about what they think would happen if there was an impasse and was a strike. That's what leads to a strike, miscalculation. So what kind of miscalculation happens during boom periods like we're having in the labor market? And I think it is revealed by the recent strikes that we've had. And although it's always hard to figure out exactly what's happening in a negotiation unless you're at the bargaining table in those discussions, the evidence is what's happened recently is consistent with evidence from the past. And during this situation in which labor market power has shifted somewhat to labor's advantage because of the tightening of the labor market, management is underestimating workers' willingness and resilience. And so what's happened during the strikes I've mentioned, Deere and Kellogg, from reports in the press, it's not that I've been at the bargaining table on them, I've just been reading the accounts, is as the strikes have gone on, management has improved its offer, has become more realistic as to what it's going to take to settle those strikes in the face of the increased bargaining power that their workers have, again, because of the improvement in the labor market. Not so surprising.